Jordan's age. So, Michael Jordan's birthday is February 17th, 1963. Fun fact, that makes him an Aquarius. But Michael, at the time of coming out of his retirement, when he decided to play for the Washington Wizards, he was 38 years old at that time in 2001. Michael Jordan is not the oldest player to ever play in the NBA, and there's been numerous former NBA players that have been older than Michael Jordan who have played in the league. There's an active player right now who's older than Michael Jordan was at the time when he was playing for the Wizards, and that's LeBron James, who is in his 40s now, I believe. But was Jordan even the oldest player at the time when he was playing for the Washington Wizards? And the answer to that question is actually no. John Stockton, surprisingly, was still playing, still dishing out assists for the Utah Jazz, and he was almost a year older than Michael Jordan, and he actually would end up retiring in 2003, the same year that Michael Jordan retired. Michael Leahy. So, Michael Leahy is an award-winning author for the Washington Post and for the Post magazine. And Michael has written a couple different books. He's probably best well known for a book that he wrote about the Los Angeles Dodgers called The Last Innocents. And he's also very well known for his book about Michael Jordan and his time with the Washington Wizards called When Nothing Else Matters. Leahy was embedded with the Wizards for pretty much the whole time that Jordan was there. I think even a little bit before Jordan actually announced that he was coming back to play for the team, because he gave a couple different interviews where Jordan was president of the team and he sat with him and talked to him. So Leahy mentions how he tried to tell the whole truth about the story of Jordan's playing career with the Washington Wizards and how Jordan didn't really like that. He was kind of on Jordan's bad side as far as media personalities. And in particular, there were a few incidents that he wrote about that Jordan did not like, and we're going to mention a few of them later in the Iceberg. And generally, he just didn't sugarcoat things. He just told it like it is. And for Jordan, that was kind of a big no-no. Leahy was not one of Jordan's guys in the media. Tyronn Lue. Tyronn Lue is the current head coach of the Los Angeles Clippers at the time of this recording. He formerly coached the Cleveland Cavaliers to the NBA championship back when the Cavs had LeBron James, Kyrie Irving. This was 2016. Before that, before he was a coach, he was also an NBA player that bounced around with a few different teams. He was on the Rockets, the Magic, the Hawks, the Mavs, and two teams of note. The first one being the Los Angeles Lakers, where he won 2 championships with Shaq and Kobe and had the famous game where Allen Iverson stepped over him. And then the other team being the Washington Wizards, where he would play with Michael Jordan. Lue signed with the Wizards while Jordan was still in his front office role as president of basketball operations. So he signed with the team in July of 2001, prior to Jordan's comeback. And then when he started playing for the Wizards, Lue would go on to have career highs in many different categories up until that point in his career. He had career numbers in points per game, assists per game, minutes per game, and games started while he was on the Wizards. He would leave the Wizards in July of 2003, the same year that Jordan finally retires for good. He would end up signing as a free agent for the Orlando Magic. Lue was part of like the very few young players on the team at the time who didn't have completely negative things to say about Michael Jordan. He said in an article that he was in awe of Jordan. He couldn't believe that he got a chance to play with quote-unquote Black Jesus. And seemingly Jordan had a decent relationship with Tyronn Lue. I think that Leahy paints the picture of Jordan really appreciating Lue's energy, sense of following direction. Lue would, if Jordan told him to do something, Lue would pretty much do it. If it was, hey, get me the ball, Lue would get him the ball. And I think Jordan kind of appreciated that. This is one of many very familiar names that in the context of the NBA, they went on to be known for other things, but they are somehow coincidentally tied to Michael Jordan and his Wizard years, and we're going to see a lot more names like Tyronn Lue. George Koehler. George Koehler is a longtime friend of Michael Jordan. George started out as Michael's driver when he met him one day at the airport in Chicago while waiting for a customer of his own. At the time, George was a chauffeur driver himself. And as the story goes, he's waiting for a different customer, and in walks this kid, this young kid at the time, Michael Jordan. You know, this is a rookie Michael Jordan. He presumably just got drafted. He's not the household name that he is today. And George, just out of sheer luck, right place, right time, asks him, hey kid, do you need a ride? And ever since then, their friendship has just remained strong ever since. And George has taken quite a few different roles in Jordan's life. He has been his driver. He's been his personal assistant. While they were in Washington, George was around him as well, and he was the man who was in charge of Jordan's security. Koehler was pretty much part of Jordan's close-knit circle in Washington, which was very, very small, and we'll get into another name or two that was in that circle. So even in the Washington days, Koehler was somebody Jordan could trust, and one of the very few people Jordan trusted. Charles Oakley. Charles Oakley was an NBA player that played for a few different teams, including the New York Knicks, Toronto Raptors, Houston Rockets, and two teams of note relevant to this iceberg, the Chicago Bulls and the Washington Wizards. Charles was drafted out of Virginia Union in 1985 by the Cleveland Cavaliers, but pretty much was traded right away to the Chicago Bulls, where he would play alongside a young Michael Jordan. Jordan described Oakley as his quote-unquote bodyguard. It's funny that we're using that word again, and Jordan had a great relationship with his bodyguards, but Oakley was very close to him, somebody that kind of protected him while he was in Chicago. And Jordan would go on to say that he was like a big brother to Oakley, kind of taking him under his wing. Very, very close, and you can see how understandably Jordan gets upset when Oakley eventually gets traded from the Bulls before all the success of the 90s Bulls teams, and he was traded to the New York Knicks for Bill Cartwright, but they never stopped being friends throughout all the time that Jordan was with the Bulls without him. And eventually they end up getting reunited, and Oakley signs with the Washington Wizards in October of 2002. Did not have a great season with the Wizards. He only started one game. He played in about half of the games that season, averaged just 1.8 points, 2.5 rebounds, but I don't really think Oakley cared. He's went on to state in interviews that he really only joined the team just to hang out and reconnect with his best friend, Michael Jordan. There was also some hope, I think, from Doug Collins in Leahy's book that, Oakley would come in and kind of mentor other guys, being, kind of an older player himself at this point, not as old as Jordan, but older player. But it wouldn't really last, and after just one season, he would move on from the team, and then he would end up retiring at the end of the 2004 season. Tim Grover. Tim Grover is an athletic trainer and author, best known for being the personal trainer of Michael Jordan throughout his basketball career. He's written a few books, one titled Relentless, another one called Winning, Jump Attack. I've actually read the one Relentless, and it was pretty good, but he has also coached or worked with other athletes, Kobe Bryant, Dwayne Wade, Charles Barkley, Aaron Donald, Max Crosby, Jason Hayward, to name a few, and I think spends a lot of time these days as a keynote speaker, consultant. In his early days, he attended University of Illinois Chicago. He was actually on the college basketball team for UIC, which I never knew that before. The story of how he got hired by Jordan is really interesting. Back in those early days of when Jordan was in Chicago, Grover was working for minimum wage, seemingly as some type of fitness consultant or maybe personal trainer, but he wasn't making a lot of money. And he wrote to the Chicago Bulls organization and basically wanted to see if he could get his foot in the door with working with professional athletes. And he writes to every player on the Chicago Bulls except for Michael Jordan, because I think maybe his thought was, well, Michael's not going to answer me. Because at this time, Michael is starting to get a ton of buzz. This is pre the championships, pre those 6 championships, but still Michael was still a really, really good basketball player. So he doesn't write to Michael. Lo and behold, the organization reaches out to him and says, hey, there actually is somebody who is inquiring on your services, and come to find out it was actually Michael Jordan reaching out to work with Tim Grover, and basically strikes up a deal with him. Hey, I'm going to give you 30 days. I'm going to try you out for 30 days and see how this goes. And after the 30 days, the rest is history. Jordan hires him around 1989, I think. And then, like I said, rest is history. 6 championships later, still working together. And even when Jordan was on the Washington Wizards, Tim was there with him as well. He was part of the very, very small circle of people that Jordan had around him, especially with the Wizards, and somebody, again, who he could trust. Grover had a more challenging time while Michael was playing on the Wizards, because he was now dealing with an older Michael Jordan. Again, at this time, he's like 38 or 39 years old, and he still has the competitiveness of like when he first entered the league, but he's in an older, aging body, and he couldn't do the same things that he could when he was younger. So Leahy describes in the book how Tim actually had to be kind of like a voice of reason to tell Michael, hey, you need to slow down here, or hey, why not, take some rest days to recover your body, especially with Jordan's knees, that we're going to talk about that later. But Tim was the voice of reason, or trying to help Michael, trying to rein him in when he wanted to just keep pushing and pushing. Doug Collins. Collins was the head coach of the Washington Wizards during Jordan's playing career with the team, so from 2001 to 2003. This was not the only time that he had coached Jordan, though, as he was also the head coach of the Chicago Bulls from 1986 to 1989. Collins also spent time as a coach with the Detroit Pistons, and then later the Philadelphia 76ers. He was also a broadcaster, having worked for CBS, TNT, ABC, among some other networks, calling NBA games, providing color commentary, etc. And also Collins was a former NBA player himself, having played for the 76ers in the 70s and early 80s. So before Michael actually announces his comeback with the Washington Wizards, he hires Doug Collins to be the coach in April of 2001. But Leahy outlines in his book that Collins was probably not the first choice that Jordan had to lead the team, to be the head coach of the team. And before Collins had come on board, the previous head coach was Leonard Hamilton. Leonard Hamilton ends up resigning after the 2000-2001 season with a 19-63 record. Very pretty bad record. And Jordan actually tried to make some calls and lure in his former teammate on the Bulls, John Paxson, but John turns it down. And shortly after that, Jordan turns to his old coach, Doug Collins, who was working in the broadcasting booth at the time. They end up inking a 4-year, $20 million deal, and comes on board and in 2 seasons improves the team. In both the years of Collins and Jordan in Washington, they go 37-45, so not bad, definitely improved. But after Jordan is let go, Collins is also let go shortly after that. Later on in his career, Doug would end up being inducted into the Basketball Hall of Fame as the class of 2024. So congratulations, Doug. Abe Pollin. Abe Pollin was the principal owner of the Washington Wizards during Jordan's tenure there, as well as well before Jordan got there. Abe was also the owner of the Washington Capitals and Washington Mystics. At the time, he was actually the longest tenured owner in the NBA, having bought the team back when they were known as the Baltimore Bullets in 1964. They would move to Washington, D.C. in 1973, and then in 1997 or 98, the Washington Bullets would change their name to what we know them today as the Washington Wizards to try to shed the negative connotation of the Bullets name. Pollin himself was a real estate developer, and he owned a construction company, both him and his wife, and he really helped build up and transform the DC area, bringing in businesses, putting up office buildings, having apartments, and doing lots of philanthropy. And overall seemed like Pollin himself was a pretty good guy. And for the early years of the Washington, the Bullets, before they were the Wizards, in like the 60s, 70s, they were decently successful, and they did win the NBA championship in 77-78. They did make the playoffs pretty consistently in those time periods of like the 60s and 70s. But then once you start getting into like the 80s, the early 90s, mostly like the early 90s, and then into throughout the 90s, the team wasn't that great. And for the 3 straight years prior to, after Michael Jordan retires from the Bulls, before he comes to the Wizards, in that time period, the Wizards were not very good. They didn't make the playoffs. We talked about how Leonard Hamilton only won 19 games in that 2000-2001 season, right when Jordan gets there. So the team was dwindling a little bit. And Jordan comes in and immediately kind of gives the team a new look, or like freshens up the place a little bit. You know, here's the greatest player of all time. He's joining the team, and immediately there's interest in the Wizards again. That kind of leads me to my next point about Pollin and Jordan's relationship, which was rocky and kind of something built from opportunity because of everything that I just mentioned. Having Jordan be on the staff and then coming back as a player definitely did a lot to drive sales, increase sellouts of the arena, think about the increase in merchandise sales of people buying Jordan jerseys, more attention just coming to the Wizards, who haven't been that great for the last several years. Poland, in a sense, liked Jordan because of what he brought to the team and the newfound success and revenue that they were getting, but also it was rocky because Jordan thought that his cachet as a player could be utilized to his advantage when he was a president and then also coming back as a player for the Wizards. And I think it rubbed some people the wrong way, particularly Poland, who I know Leahy highlights in the books. There were some disagreements on the contract terms of Jordan when he was negotiating his contract to come back as president. There was also some disagreements on who had the power as far as making some basketball decisions, and in particular some trades that Jordan said were vetoed by Poland, and Poland would go back and say, well, no, I didn't do any of that. So a little bit of rockiness, which would ultimately lead to Jordan leaving the Wizards, and we'll get to more of that later. But lastly, Abe would end up passing away, sadly, in November of 2009. The Washington Wizards would then end up being purchased by Ted Leonisis through his holding/ownership group, Monumental Sports and Entertainment. Richard Hamilton. Richard Hamilton is a now retired former NBA player who played for the Detroit Pistons, Chicago Bulls, and the Washington Wizards. He was selected with the 7th overall pick in the 1999 NBA draft out of University of Connecticut. Hamilton had the nickname Rip, which used to be his father's nickname because he would rip the diapers off a very young Richard when changing him, and his father, recognizing that Hamilton had the skills to play in the NBA someday, thought that every superstar basically has a nickname. Think about, like Magic or MJ, and thought that Richard, his son Richard, would also need a nickname and pass down his own nickname to him. And that's the story of how Hamilton got the nickname Rip. Hamilton grew up in Coatesville, Pennsylvania, about 40 miles outside of Philly, and as the story goes, played against Kobe Bryant in high school, had a sort of rivalry friendship as they were growing up, and then, of course, they would meet in the NBA Finals in 2004. Rip would start off his NBA career a little slow, only scoring like about 9 points per game in his rookie season, but then quickly in his second year averaged 18 points per game. This was when Jordan had signed with the team as president, so he was in the executive seats. And then when Jordan announces his comeback, I think a dilemma sort of took place between, what do we do with a budding star in Richard Hamilton and an aging legend whose best years were behind them. Leahy describes how, in the book, how in the beginning, Hamilton maybe wanted to learn from Jordan and kind of acknowledge that maybe he'll take a sort of back seat and learn as much as he can because, obviously he's the GOAT, right? He's the greatest of all time. But I think as time goes on and they start playing with each other, Rip would get visibly kind of annoyed a little bit or upset when the offense would pretty much run through Jordan, and the rest of the team was relegated to this moniker that was given to them called Jordan-aires, which was actually a nickname given to Michael Jordan's teammates back when he played in Chicago. And I don't think Rip liked being called a Jordan-aire very much. He basically thought that, hey, we can play too. Like, I can play too. I'm a good player. I don't see how I'm like in this supporting role, supporting Michael, like we're all part of the same team here. In the end, tensions between the two would ultimately culminate in Hamilton being traded. More on that later. But like I said, he would get traded and go on to have a lot of success with the Detroit Pistons, multi-time All-Star, NBA champion, and cool to see that, especially as a Pistons fan. Washington Wizards. So I covered some of this in the Abe Pollin entry, just about the history of the Wizards, but we can talk a little more on the current state of the Washington Wizards and how they play in the Eastern Conference. They are, at the time of this recording, coached by Brian Keefe. Again, they've won one NBA championship in 1978. The last 4 seasons, at the time of this recording, the last 4 seasons, they have failed to make the playoffs. They've had some standout players, not just Michael Jordan, but they've had guys like Bradley Beal, Gilbert Arenas, John Wall, to name a few, Wes Unseld, to name a few, many, many more. They are currently owned by Monumental Sports and Entertainment, which was founded by Ted Leonsis, who also owns the Washington Capitals and the Mystics. So similar deal to what Abe Pollin had himself before he passed in 2009. As of the time of this recording, in recent news, the Wizards were seeking to move to Northern Virginia along with the Capitals, but a last-minute deal with the mayor of DC, Muriel Bowser, kept them at their current location where they are at in DC until the year 2050. Ted Leonsis. Ted Leonsis, like we've mentioned before, is the current principal owner of the Washington Wizards, and he was instrumental in bringing Michael Jordan aboard to both as an ownership stake in the team and as president of basketball operations with the Washington Wizards. Abe and Jordan, like we talked before, didn't really have a great relationship, but Ted was kind of the opposite, and he really stood in awe of Jordan and gushed over having the chance to work with Jordan. And it was really him that was kind of the mediating factor in bringing Jordan to Washington. We will talk about the exact deal later, but other than that, Ted made his money in the .com space as an executive at AOL. At the time of Jordan joining the team, he had a 44% share in the Wizards through a holding company called Lincoln Holdings. Ted's deal with the team stated that if anything happened to Pollin, if he decided to retire or relinquish ownership, that Ted would basically have the first chance at buying out Pollin's shares, which eventually did happen after Abe Pollin passed away in 2009. Kwame Brown. Kwame Brown is a former NBA player that played for a few different NBA teams, including the Lakers, Pistons, Warriors, 76ers, and Washington Wizards. Kwame was a highly talented basketball player coming out of the state of Georgia. He went on to be named a McDonald's All-American and really came from humble beginnings. The town that he was from was super, super small. His father gets arrested when he was young. He grew up basically in like a single parent household. He's got like 7 brothers and sisters, and just life was tough growing up. But if there's one thing he could do, he could play basketball. And like I said, had a lot of success at the high school level, had some college offers, but ends up opting out of attending the University of Florida for the NBA draft. And he was widely regarded as the best draft prospect in the class of 2001. And in 2001, we have Michael Jordan, who is in his president role at the Washington Wizards and has the number 1 overall pick. And what happens but him selecting Kwame Brown with the first overall pick in 2001, making Kwame the first high school player to be selected with the number 1 overall pick. Now, Kwame initially was revered coming into Washington, and he was seen as like a game changer, like a guy you could really build your franchise around. There's actually a story of a pre-draft workout where the Wizards invited both Kwame Brown and Tyson Chandler, another big prospect at the time, and they had them go through a workout together. And what ends up happening is they end up having a one-on-one match, and according to the story, Kwame does super well and kind of beats him up, like takes it to him. Kwame afterwards would saunter over to Michael Jordan, who was there with the scouts and coaches watching this workout, and would tell Jordan, hey, if you draft me first, I'll never disappoint you and I'll beat you. Saying like, hey, if we play one-on-one, I would even beat you too. And for whatever reason, that competitive spirit maybe reminded Jordan of himself when he was younger, and maybe that was the reason why he selected Kwame Brown first overall. But the initial promise turned into frustration as time went on, and Kwame never really earned the respect or trust of Jordan or Collins when Collins came in to coach the team. But also, nobody really helped this teenager at the time get adjusted to life as a professional. And Kwame was seen as, lazy, somebody who was immature, somebody who he showed up to camp his rookie year overweight, and the Wizards just didn't really have time for that. Jordan didn't really have time for that. Maybe in the beginning he was patient with him, but all in all, just Jordan wasn't really waiting for Kwame to catch up. And Leahy talks about how the Wizards were really hoping to get like a Jermaine O'Neal or a Kevin Garnett with this first overall pick, but what they ended up getting was disappointment. Kwame Brown would end up retiring in 2014, being labeled by a lot of people as a bust, but he has been on like a podcast or like a media tour. He's given interviews basically trying to seemingly reclaim his legacy, saying, hey, I wasn't a bust, I was just misunderstood. And he just wasn't given the right tools to succeed, and how all of this negative media attention really affected him. So, kudos to him. He still had a long NBA career, so, good for him for making a career out of playing basketball. Larry Wooten. Not really much to say about this Iceberg entry, other than Leahy mentions Larry's name a couple times in his book. He is one of Jordan's bodyguards during his playing days with the Washington Wizards. But other than that, there's really not much to say. I tried to find some information about him. I couldn't really find anything on the internet. Other than, Jordan liked his security guards. He had a pretty close relationship with them. They spent the most time around Jordan, and kind of a weird thing to say that he had a closer relationship with his bodyguards than like his actual teammates, it seemed like, and that's the way that Leahy portrays it in his book. But yeah, not much to say about Larry. We'll just go to the next entry. Michael Jordan. The man himself is the last entry of Tier 1 of this iceberg. Michael Jordan was the third overall pick in the 1984 NBA draft by the Chicago Bulls. And what more can I say? I mean, he's got all the stats, all the accolades. Here's just a few. He was Rookie of the Year. He's a 14-time NBA All-Star. He's won 6 NBA championships, 6 NBA Finals MVPs, 10 scoring titles, 5 league MVPs. He was a slam dunk contest champion. He was an NCAA champion. He was 10-time All-NBA first team, 9-time All-NBA defensive team. He was an All-American. I know I'm jumbling all these around. And not to mention, he was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom. So the topic of our iceberg and the last entry here in Tier 1, and I'll see you guys in Tier 2.